Jesus sees what others don't. Where others saw only a loser, Jesus saw a leader. Where others saw only a tax collector, Jesus saw an author. Where others saw only a bad influence, Jesus saw the potential for good influence. And he sees what maybe others don't see in you. Maybe what you don't even see in yourself. Jesus sees not only what we are, but what we can become. Maybe as I started this message, you thought, me, a spiritual influencer? Yeah, you may not see yourself that way, but Jesus does. So we're hearing so much right now about influence and influencers. Especially on social media. And a lot of the talk revolves around how people are moving away from traditional celebrities and looking more and more to everyday influencers. People who are relatable, people who are authentic, people who share their lives transparently. And sometimes we call these micro influencers. Like their platform isn't necessarily as large, but their audience is really engaged. And there's a lot of talk too around like the responsibility that these micro influencers feel to use their voice for good, whether they're advocating for social issues, mental health, or even faith. God has given each one of us a platform. And yeah, on social media to some extent, but not just on social media, in life. In fact, they're talking more and more about what they call quiet influence, the power of small personal interactions. And so today we want to start a new message series called Your Influence Era. We're going to be looking at some of my favorite Bible stories around evangelism, sharing our faith, having spiritual influence. And so my goal is that you would see yourself as a spiritual influencer, that together we would learn what it looks like to influence people spiritually, that is, for us with realness, to have meaningful impact as we point people to Jesus. It's funny because in life, in general, reproduction is a fundamental biological drive. And I think that on some level, most followers of Jesus have a desire to reproduce spiritually. We all have family members and friends, co-workers, fellow students, neighbors, people that we hope to see experience what we've experienced, coming to trust Jesus, to forgive them and lead them, and the life transformation that follows. But we have questions, fears, obstacles, needs. And so we're going to try to address some of those in this series. Today, we're going to talk about an IRS agent named Matt, who became a follower of Jesus and found a really creative, non-confrontational way to tell his story. And so if you cringe at the idea of evangelism, this message, I think, is going to be eye-opening and helpful for you. And so I want to talk first about what we'll call intensity. Look with me at Mark. I didn't tell you to turn, did I? I need you to turn to Mark chapter 2. And I'm going to begin reading in verse 13, where it says, "Then he, Jesus, went out again by the Sea of Galilee, Israel's largest freshwater lake. And all the multitude came to him, and he taught them. As he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax office. And he said to him, 'Follow me.' So he arose and followed him." So meet Levi, verse 14, also known as Matthew. We learned that in the book Matthew 9, verse 9. But he worked for the IRS. Maybe you've heard the urban legend about the guy that owed the IRS $3,400. He did his taxes and that was what he owed the IRS. And he had just recently read an article where the Pentagon was paying $172 each for hammers and NASA $600 each for toilet seats. So he sent the IRS 4 toilet seats and 6 hammers. He told them that they could use the $32 overpayment for the presidential election fund. That's hilarious and awesome all at the same time. In New Testament times, there's a little bit to know about what it meant to be a tax collector, to sit at the tax office. Basically, the Roman Empire gave the right to collect taxes to the highest bidder. And what they would do is, they would have a set number that the tax collector had to gather. And anything that the tax collector could gather above and beyond that, he could pocket. So as a result, tax collectors were despised because they collected more than they had to. And they profited from, their collusion with the Roman Empire. So, they were seen as extortionists and as traitors. The idea of a Jewish tax collector, well, that was something like American Taliban. Like that's how contradictory it seemed to people's ears. What I love is, when it says that Jesus saw Levi, the Greek verb translated he saw, it's not the word that just means to see. There's another Greek verb that just means that, to see. But this one means to see and to perceive. Quick shot of water here. Yes, that's cold water in my Sola coffee mug. The point that I want to make is that Jesus sees what others don't. Where others saw only a loser, Jesus saw a leader. Where others saw only a tax collector, Jesus saw an author. The book of Matthew that I referenced moments ago, well, that's the gospel according to Matthew. That was written by this man, Levi, or Matthew. Where others saw only a bad influence, Jesus saw the potential for good influence. That's right. He saw Matthew as a spiritual influencer. He saw what others didn't see in Matthew, and he sees what maybe others don't see in you. Maybe what you don't even see in yourself. I mean, Jesus sees not only what we are, but what we can become. Maybe as I started this message, you thought, me, a spiritual influencer? Yeah, you may not see yourself that way, but Jesus does. And just as Jesus sees what you may not see in yourself, the more you become like Jesus, the more you will see in others what they don't see in themselves. I think it's worth pointing out that the name Matthew means gift of God. And so Levi, who was a taker, although we don't know that Jesus changed his name, there are others that we're specifically told Jesus changed their names. We don't know that about Levi or Matthew. We don't know that Jesus changed his name, but we do know that he's known by the two names. And so Levi, who was a taker, becomes Matthew, who would be a giver. And Jesus said to him, "Follow me," in verse 14. This was a call to discipleship. We've talked before here at Sola Church Online about how with these words, Jewish rabbis invited young men to be their apprentices. And it involved leaving their village and their friends and devoting their life to learning how to do what his rabbi did. And so that's what's happening here. In the parallel account in Luke 5, verse 28, it says that Matthew or Levi left all. And so this was an experience so powerful that it divided his whole life in two. Like for Matthew going forward, there would only be before this and after this. Like his whole life would fall easily into those two eras, so to speak. And Matthew would have an intense desire to tell this story. I've used this illustration before, but it's been suggested. I heard this originally in another context, but I like to use it to illustrate this point, that if we took a jar, and when we came to faith, every time we had a spiritual conversation, every time we told our story, we put a penny in it for the first 2 years. And then after 2 years, we began taking a penny out of the jar every time we had a spiritual conversation. Every time we told our story about coming to faith, we took a penny out. We would probably never take all the pennies out. Those first couple of years were just raving about our newfound faith, about our relationship with Jesus, about how God is changing our life. And then it just trails off. It does. Howard Hendrickson wrote that the average person coming to Christ is good for only 2 years. After that, he's dropped all of his lost friends, or they have dropped him, usually the former. So why would we do that? Why would we drop our old friends? Why would we drop friends just because they don't share our faith? Well, one thing that I've observed is this sort of natural progression where we become a follower of Jesus, and then we're helping others become followers, but eventually we're helping only other followers until finally we're hoping only that other followers will help us. You see how it goes from being outwardly focused to being inwardly focused, and then to being very self-focused. And so we've got to get back to helping others become followers of Jesus. I've taught before about how in the United States, if all of the unchurched people in the United States were their own country, they would be the 11th largest country in the world. I mean, that's staggering to think about, isn't it? Anecdotally, here on the west side of Los Angeles, only 3% attend church. What about the other 97%? You know, when they ask people in LA County about faith, like what faith group they identify with or whether they identify with faith, 50% identify as nuns, N-O-N-E-S, nuns, no faith at all. So yeah, I mean, half the people in LA County are nuns. Probably some of your family members, probably some of your friends are nuns. I don't know now, it was probably a couple months ago that I talked about the book by my friend Kai Bowman, Evangelistic Prayer. I highly recommend it. It's available on Amazon.com. It will inspire you and teach you how to pray for, people that you care about to come to faith. But I just sort of adapted something that he said in that book, and I put it like this: praying with a deep desire to see people come to faith starts by praying for a deep desire to see people come to faith. And so one thing that I have experienced in my own prayer life is that the more I pray for people who don't know Jesus to come to know him, the more intensity that I have to see that happen. And the less I pray for that, the more indifference that I have about seeing that happen. And so I want to suggest that when we talk about intensity, it begins with prayer. Like the more we pray, the more intensity that we're going to have to see the people around us come to faith. What we want to do is put a big old dent in the 50%, right, that are nuns. We're praying for future former nuns. Okay, so today as we start this new series, Your Influence Era, we've talked first about intensity, but let's talk next about creativity. Going back to the text here in Mark 2, look at verse 15. It says, "Now it happened as he was dining in Levi's house that many tax collectors and sinners also sat together with Jesus and his disciples. For there were many, and they followed him." Now, I've been evangelized. I've been proselytized or had someone attempt to proselytize me, haven't you? Like sometimes I've had Christians try to evangelize me, not knowing that I'm a Christian, much less that I'm a pastor. Other times, members of cults have tried to proselytize me. I think about times over the years that people have come to my door, or that co-workers have, been working on me over time, trying to woo me to join their cult. I don't like it when that happens. And I'll bet you don't like it either. I mean, I think we feel the same way about that we do about junk mail, about pop-up windows, about spam, about telemarketers, right? We don't love it. We don't like it. We hate it. And so for us as followers of Jesus, when it comes to sharing our faith with other people, we know that we should and we wish that we could, but like knock on strangers' doors, stop random people on the street, flash Bible verses at sporting events, stand on street corners? No way. Like it is not our style. And it wasn't Matt's style either. Matt was so much more creative and so much less confrontational. His was what we might call the interpersonal style. In the parallel account in Luke 5, verse 29, it says that Levi gave Jesus a great feast. So, this event that we read about here was actually in Jesus' honor. But I think it was not just for Jesus, it was for Matthew's friends. He threw a party. He wanted his old friends to meet his new friends, and he wanted his new friends to meet his old friends. And the party was the perfect place for relationships to form and deepen, for spiritual conversations to go back and forth. And this is how it works. So Matthew took the interpersonal style. What if you did that? What if you did what Matthew did? What if you threw what Mark Middleberg calls a Matthew party? I'm talking about following Matthew's example by simply planning a social event to facilitate the forming and deepening of relationships between your friends who are Christians and your friends who aren't. It's so easy. We just had the Super Bowl, a month ago? It's so easy to throw a Super Bowl party and just invite all of our Christian friends. But what would happen if instead we placed the emphasis on inviting, neighbors and coworkers who are not people of faith? And yeah, invite a few of your church friends over as well, so that they can all intermingle and cross-pollinate, so to speak. But what if we shifted away from our little club and started thinking about and reaching out to other people? I've had some success with this throughout my life. Now listen, I'm not the hero of this or any other story, trust me. I just want to throw out a few times that I tried to do something like this and it worked out well. Many years ago, before I first got into full-time ministry, I managed a restaurant. And I remember one time inviting several employees that, were my friends over to my apartment just for a video night. We just watched a video together. But it was interesting that after the video, some conversations kind of came around to spiritual things, and it was very meaningful. At the end of the evening, when most everyone else left, I had one coworker that asked if they could stay and talk a little bit more. I was like, sure. And so as soon as it was just us, they wanted to revisit the spiritual conversation. And that before he left my house that night, I prayed with him as he opened his heart, asking Jesus to forgive him and lead him. It was a life-changing moment for him and really for us both. I remember the first house that I owned in Austin, I had neighbors that at some point they actually were the ones that took the initiative, inviting us over for dinner. But that's how we first got to know them, and they got to know us and found out that I was a pastor, and a little bit of time passed, but eventually they visited the church, and they didn't start attending regularly immediately, but they started visiting more frequently, and eventually they were attending regularly, and eventually every member of that family became a follower of Jesus. Pretty cool, right? I mean, I had one friend who used to have a regular game night at his house and inviting friends, both Christians and non-Christians, and saw friendships form between them that were meaningful for everyone involved. I had another friend who made it a point to go to all the significant events in the lives of his friends, especially those who were not people of faith. He really made an effort to show up for their birthdays and their kids' birthdays and their baby showers and their graduations and all of those kinds of things. Again, he was forming and deepening relationships. So what could you do? Maybe you could throw a backyard party. Maybe you could plan a giant block party. Maybe when the holidays roll around again, we just had the holidays, right? But maybe when they roll around again, you could plan a Christmas or a New Year's party. When the Super Bowl rolls around, you could plan a Super Bowl party like I talked about before. Maybe you could even plan a smaller private dinner where you just invite a few people. Maybe a dessert time with the neighbors. But all of these are opportunities. Invite some of your new friends. Invite some of your old friends. Invite some who are people of faith and a whole bunch who aren't. And just see what God does. One of the things that we value as a church is this interpersonal style, what we sometimes call relational evangelism, friendship evangelism, permission evangelism. And as you and I begin to do this actively, we're taking personal ownership of and responsibility for our shared mission here at Sola Church Online. So I encourage you, be creative, have fun, connect with people, talking about the kind of connection that puts you in a position to guide and challenge people in meaningful ways. So yeah, as we're starting out this Your Influence Era series, we've talked about intensity, we've talked about creativity, and here before we're done, I want to talk about approachability. Look at verse 16. It says, "And when the scribes and Pharisees saw him eating with the tax collectors and sinners, they said to his disciples, 'How is it that he eats with tax collectors and sinners?' When Jesus heard about it, he said to them, 'Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance.'" Listen, let me tell you right now, If, as a result of this message or this series, you decide to step in new ways into your influence era, you're likely going to take some criticism. You just are. There was a guy named D.L. Moody who was an evangelist in the Chicago area, and he took a lot of criticism for his efforts to connect with people and reach people, to have spiritual influence. And he said one time, "I like the way I'm doing it better than the way you're not doing it." I love that quote, and I've repeated it to myself under my breath many, many, many times. Often after reading the comments that people leave to posts on social media. But it's interesting that in Luke's parallel account, when he describes the Pharisees' pushback, he says that the scribes and the Pharisees murmured against the disciples. Murmur is one of those words that sounds like what it is. Like right now, if you say the word murmur 3 times, especially if there's 2 or 3 people watching this online service together, if you guys say it, murmur, murmur, murmur. Yeah, that's what it sounded like. That's what their complaining sounded like. And Jesus is like, every party needs a pooper. That's why I invited you. I don't know if he said it, but I bet he thought it. Oh man, in New Testament times, religious people, like the scribes and the Pharisees, had little or nothing to do with irreligious people, like tax collectors and sinners. They had nothing to do with people who weren't exactly like them. And those people who may have been far from God, well, they heard it in the way that the religious people talked about others. They saw it in the way that religious people treated others. How do we talk about people? You know, tax collectors, that was used as a pejorative in New Testament times. Sinners was used as a label. It often just referred to people who were less observant. You know, people who didn't live up to the very strict standards of the Pharisees, for example. And these pejoratives and these labels were offensive then as now. I mean, even in this talk, I've said things that I know don't sit well with people. I've tried largely to avoid it, and I'm more conscious about it than I've ever been before. Often correcting myself, but you know, even when we like the in unbeliever can be offensive to people. The non in non-Christian can be offensive to people, and it's difficult because you know we have language, we have words. Like even in my message, I'm trying to communicate certain concepts about people who are in one group versus people who are in another group. And sometimes we have to use words like un or non to differentiate. So there is a challenge involved there. And you know, so maybe part of it is not just being careful about our choice of words, but being careful about our tone. I think part of the problem is just that we fail to see that we are sinners. Yeah, we are sinners. That's reason enough to change our tone, to get off our high horse and stop looking down our noses at other people. We are all in this together and can learn from each other. So how we talk about people, but what about how we treat people? Well, you know, notice that the thing that really offended them was that Jesus was eating and drinking with the tax collectors and the sinners. Keep in mind that in New Testament times, to share a meal with someone, it was such an intimate thing. Like, their concept was that to share a meal with someone was to become one with them. That you know, because the same food, the same drink that is in you is in me, that makes us one. And the Pharisees were all about anything but that. Like, the word Pharisee actually means separated. It comes from a root that means separated. And they practiced what is sometimes called separatism. Like, they not only figuratively, but very literally kept a distance from people who weren't just like them. And so it's interesting that in Matthew's parallel account, in Matthew 9, verse 13, when Jesus responds to them, he says something that Mark and Luke don't record. He says to them, "Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice." He was quoting from the ancient Hebrew prophet Hosea. The passage is found in Hosea 6, verse 6. And the idea there is that, people who were very good at sacrifice, that is, going to church, so to speak, going to the place of worship, participating in rituals, they were really good at that, but they weren't merciful. Like they'd missed the point. They'd lost the plot. And I'm afraid that so many of us have too. Like, I think there's just so much wrong thinking. It's so easy for us to start to think about the church as some kind of Christian club. If you think about Sola Church, even Sola Church Online is just some kind of a Christian club. You're thinking wrongly about this. For that matter, when Jesus says, "I haven't come to help people who are well, I've come to help people who are sick." I mean, the truth is no one is well. We're all sick. It's our failure to recognize that it is fueling the problem here. But the church is a hospital. Sola Church Online is like a triage unit. And when we start to think about the church as a club, we're not looking for a hospital, much less a triage unit. We're looking for a morgue. I'm not interested in being a morgue. I'm interested in being a hospital. There's a very old story about a lighthouse. As the story goes, once upon a time, on a dangerous stretch of coastline, a small lighthouse was built to guide ships safely to shore. And the people of the nearby village were dedicated to its mission. They kept the light burning brightly. They watched for ships in distress. They braved the storms to rescue those in danger. But over time, the lighthouse became well known and more people joined the effort. They decided to renovate the lighthouse, making it bigger and more comfortable. They added a clubhouse with soft chairs, good food, warm fellowship, and soon the volunteers became more focused on the clubhouse than the lighthouse, hosting dinners, decorating the space, and enjoying each other's company. One night, a great storm sent a ship crashing into the rocks. But when the alarm was sounded, few people responded. Most were too comfortable inside. A few old rescuers tried to help out, but were told, "We should really hire professionals for that." Eventually, the lighthouse stopped sending out rescue teams at all. It became a social club rather than a life-saving station. Ironically, another lighthouse had to be built down the shore because the need for rescue never stopped. Yeah, think about that. Think about the implications of that. Well, getting back to the Pharisees and the way they treated the tax collectors and sinners, the way they made them feel. The Pharisees acted like other people had cooties. Remember when you were a kid? Ew, cooties. That's how they acted. And my guess is that we probably all know someone, if not some people, who are not followers of Jesus, who, if they could be really honest without any fear at all, they would probably tell us that they have never felt accepted or respected or loved by followers of Jesus, that they have only ever felt judged by us. And yet, when we read the Gospels, when we read Mark chapter 2, we see that irreligious people liked Jesus. They didn't like the Pharisees. Why? Well, they liked Jesus because Jesus liked them. The Pharisees didn't. People like people who like them. The Pharisees didn't like them, and they knew it. Jesus was approachable. The Pharisees weren't. So are you approachable? I mean, I imagine that Matthew's friends were seeing this already, but over time would see it even more. I'm thinking about little things we learn about Matthew as time goes on. We see Matthew becoming more generous, more compassionate, more forgiving, more loving. If we're one of Matthew's friends, we're thrilled about his new faith. We find ourselves being more and more grateful to have a friend like Matt in our lives. We start to wish that more people were like Matt. We start to wish that we were more like Matt. You see what happens here over time? One writer said, "I am learning that the church has nothing to say to the world until it throws better parties. I mean backyards and basements and porches. It is in the flow of real life in the places we live and move with people. That's where the action is, right? So when people in my life are ready to take the next step spiritually, I want them to think of me. Because I want to have been building into their lives the way Matt was building into the lives of his friends. When my friends who are not people of faith, my friends who are not followers of Jesus, when they come to the point that they want to know more, when they come to the point that they want to have a spiritual conversation, when they come to the point that they're ready to think about trusting Jesus to forgive them and lead them, I want to be the first person that comes to their mind. You know what I want them to think? I want them to think, I need to text Alan. I need to call Alan. I need to schedule a coffee meetup with Alan. Yeah. That's what I want them to think. And I want your friends to think that about you. So starting out this Your Influence Era series, we've talked about intensity, we've talked about creativity, we've talked about approachability. You know, a tax collector, believe. Matthew's story teaches us that anyone can believe. A sinner, belong. Matthew's story teaches us that everyone should belong. That's why we like to say at Sola Church Online, anyone can believe and everyone should belong. Say it with me there at home. Anyone can believe and everyone should belong. Louder for the people in the back. Anyone can believe and everyone should belong. So who can believe? Yeah, anyone. And who should belong? Yeah, everyone. So who are you going to invite? Someone. You got to invite someone into your life. You got to invite someone to hang out with you, to be with you, to have the opportunity to deepen their relationship with you. You've got to invite someone to meet your Christian friends, your church friends. You've got to invite someone to go with you to church. Surveys show that most people would accept an invitation to go to church with a friend, but very few Christians ever ask. And yeah, there comes a time to even lovingly suggest to someone that they take that step of placing their faith in Jesus. Yeah, because this is the start of your influence era. Father, thank you for this story. So grateful for what you did in Matthew's life. And how, although we read the account in Mark, you know, all these years later, people are still hearing this story and even reading the story in Matthew's own words from Matthew. What an amazing thing. Like his spiritual influence still continues on. That was the beginning of his influence era, but that continues on. The ripple effects of that continue on long after he's been gone from this earth. And Lord, we want to step into our influence era. Would you help us to take the lessons that we've learned today and the lessons that we're going to learn in the weeks ahead to heart? Lord, may we really right now even begin just praying regularly for those friends and those family members who don't yet know you. Maybe especially for those that we could invite to go with us to a service on Easter, even to watch the Easter service online on April 20th. Lord, we're just believing that over this next month plus that you're going to stir our hearts and you're going to work in us and through us in such a way that come April 20th, we're going to see some amazing things happen in the lives of people around us. But we're so excited because we know that this influence era is going to continue throughout the rest of our lives. So we just lift these things up to you now in the name of your Son, Jesus.